Hello everyone, this is Attack the Backlog, the podcast where I, Marc, tries to make a dent in their backlog one game at a time. This is episode 2, El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron, a 3D action platformer which originally came out on both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 on April 28th, 2011. I'm playing on Xbox 360, and the thing that stands out first and foremost, it's what initially drew me to the game so many years ago when I believe I first saw it on the 1UP show, which is a long gone show, is the art. The art is beautiful and incredibly varied. There is so much going on aesthetically. It jumps from different styles, from very desaturated, almost black and white environments, and in fact there are a few that are completely black and white outside of the handful of characters on screen, to incredibly textured, like there's a gene texture going on overlaying the art and just very painterly vibes going. There's a Tron-esque environment that's very robotic and futuristic sci-fi with and neons going everywhere. There is an early environment that is very red and has fireworks going on, and it's just a visual feast that is incredible to take in and just be in awe of it. It still looks great. Of course, resolution-wise, it's not up to par with games today, but from a artistic standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, from a stylistic standpoint, all that, it is still an incredibly gorgeous game, and it's just nice to see something that stands out so much. If you were looking at a row of 10, 20, 30 games, El Shaddai would stand out because of its art, but that's pretty much where it all falls apart, because the rest of the game is just a bit of a mess, and that mess varies in how bad it is and how messy it actually is. Starting with the story, which is, I guess, loosely based off an old Jewish piece of religious text, the Book of Enoch. In El Shaddai, you are playing as Enoch, who is a human appealing to the gods, to this higher council, in order to stop this planned flood from destroying all of mankind, because this group of angels, these fallen angels, have just lost their mind, essentially, and there are allusions that I think they're trying to help humans adapt and evolve at a quicker pace, or in an unnatural way. And you, Enoch, are tasked with collecting these angels and bringing them back to heaven for judgment. I don't know. That's the biggest problem with the story, is that it is convoluted and not very coherent and really just hard to follow. And it sucks because I can see little bits of I can see these fragments and pieces of the story that I want to get invested in, and I can see parts of it where I feel like, man, there's something really good here, but it's like a puzzle that hasn't been put together, that has just been emptied out, and maybe there are chunks that are put together, but there are still piles of pieces that are just scattered about, and they're just leaving it at that. That is the final product, and it sucks because there's something interesting there, but I just wasn't sure what was going on, and after a certain point, I just succumbed to the fact that I knew I wasn't going to really understand what was happening, because there's just so much going on. There's so many characters, and they throw in these little bits of story in between levels, and these parts where you're fighting these angels for maybe 10 seconds, and they give you a little bit of dialogue, and then it just transitions to the rest of the game. And in most of those cases, I end up dying right away, but that's not a big problem because I was supposed to die, apparently. And it's frustrating that ends up being the case with the game, because it is a story I want to really be invested. I want to get involved in, but I can't. It's really disappointing in that sense. But then transitioning to the gameplay, the action of it, I'm gonna hold the platforming for last because that's the biggest problem. But the combat is very simple in that it works on a rock paper scissors type of system. There are 3 weapons: an arch, a gale, and a veil. The arch is this curved blade that looks like a bow, but it's a melee weapon. And the gale is sort of like a disc, a ring thing that I think you hold 2 of them, and that's a ranged weapon. So the arch is more of a mid-range weapon. Gale is long range, and then the veil is this shield that you break apart into 2 pieces and hold them in both your arms, and that is a close range weapon. The gale and arch are fast-paced; they're pretty quick, but the veil is a very slow, heavy weapon that can deal a lot of damage. But the way it works is that the arch will be really good against this type of weapon, the gale will be good against this type of weapon, and the veil will be good against this other type of weapon. That system I never really got a handle of outside of boss fights, because when you are in these boss fights, they will put a little halo around on the top of the boss's head so that you can see if a weapon is good or bad against them in their current state, because they'll usually transform to build their defenses towards one weapon or another. If it's red, the current weapon is no good. If it's blue, it's really good. If it's purple, it's neutral. But outside of that, in the basic combat, I just found myself using the arch almost universally just because I like the way that one felt. The gale is incredibly boring to use because it just involves you staying far away from your opponents and just mashing the attack button, mashing. And the veil is just so slow to do anything that it's also not that fun to use. And the arch is a nice balance between the two. But ultimately the combat was just very samey, and all the enemies have the same weapons. And as you progress through the game, they just change sort of their attack patterns, or they just become a bit more finicky to deal with. They might dodge more, they'll look different, but it's just the same from the very beginning to the end, and you don't get a lot of combos or kind of extras added on to that combat. So it just feels like a really hack and slashy type of game. And I was disappointed by that. I would have liked a dodge or something of that sort. I also, another part of the combat is that you have to bless your weapon or whatever, because when your weapon turns like an orange glow, because your weapons will glow, that means your weapon has lost its strength essentially, and it's much weaker, and it'll take longer to defeat enemies. And you press the left bumper to whatever, you give it its nice glow again. Or you can steal weapons from enemies when they're glowing as well, have this like entire halo encompassing their whole body, and they're laying on the ground. You can then steal their weapon from them, and it'll be fully charged for a period of time. But that's really all there is to the combat, and there's like, the blocking just felt like I didn't find enjoyment out of blocking, and I really wish I could just dodge or counter or something. You can counter, but I never found a point of it, in part because the way death works in the game is really weird, and it makes the game have no stakes. When you die, you are told to just keep mashing the buttons, because you're like, essentially it goes into like a first person, your eyelids are starting to close, mashing buttons will open them up and give you new life and give you new armor, the way your health works in the game. And one thing I do like is that the game is HUD free. There's nothing on screen, so the way you know how much health you have is how much armor you have, much like Ghosts and Goblins or such. And when you have a superpower, this ability where I think it's Uriel will come and help you and give strength to your attacks for a short period of time, you start glowing orange. Funny thing about that, you don't even know that that thing exists. Well, you don't get access to it for about 2 hours into the game, which is maybe a third of the way in. And the entire time prior to that, you're collecting all these orange orbs that are meaningless up to that point. You don't know what the hell they're for, but they are attracted to you. You break something, they come into you. You're like, well, am I going to be able to level up my character at some point? I don't know. And then eventually you learn what those are for. And that was just frustrating because I kept collecting all these things and felt compelled to collect them even though I didn't know why I should do that. But I do appreciate the HUD-free interface, and just it makes the art really shine, which I think is probably one of the reasons why they did that. But the combat just felt very samey from start to finish, and the death, you die, you mash the buttons, you wake up, and you're like, oh, my armor is fully there now again, and I can just go on. The enemies don't respawn. It's not like you have to start over. It's not a continue in that sense. The only time you have to continue in that way is if you are doing a platforming segment, I'll get to those, and you fall off when you have no health, and it's just, okay, you got to continue. You can't open your eyes and rise from there for whatever dumb reason. But, and the funny thing with that is the game starts with you being thrust into this boss fight against one of these fallen angels. It's not really a boss fight, but it just puts you against one, doesn't tell you how any of the controls work, and you just get your ass handed to you. And then it tells you, hey, it's not over for you. Just mash on all the buttons and you'll wake up. And then it does that. It rewinds the game and it puts you back at the start menu, starts the game up again, and you're like, what the hell is going on? I don't understand anything, but okay, I guess this is part of the game. And that was just an interesting way to start. And I was intrigued by that. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. I like, it's in the same way that people will complain about the, I believe, 2008 Prince of Persia not really having any stakes because you just fall off a thing and then the princess, whatever, just grabs your arm and everything's fine. But I don't mind that. It just is something to be aware of and does somewhat take away from any kind of worry about, oh, well, this boss battle, I really need to be cautious. No, I just brute force it. I don't need to be really defensive because if I get killed, I just mash the buttons, I wake up again, got full armor. They still have however much health they lost, it's gone. So I'm just going to keep doing that. But now let's move on to the platforming, which is where El Shaddai really shines. And the platforming is broken up into two different parts. There are 3D platforming parts and 2D side-scrolling parts. The 2D side-scrolling bits are fine. They're usually okay. It can feel good at times if you're in a groove and you're landing all the jumps, but then if you miss one, it's easy to just get flustered and end up missing a lot. And those sections look really good too. I mean, there was one that takes place in like I guess it would be a church, but there are stained glass windows in the background, and it's very pretty because the rest of the environment is somewhat muted, and then you have these very bright, colorful stained glass windows, and I think that was a section early on in the game that was showing you all the different fallen angels, and it was really beautiful, and I was still super interested in the story at that point. The platforming hadn't gotten too bad, but the 3D platforming is god-awful, and it starts off terribly with a section that is just I was maybe a half hour in the game, and I died way too many times trying to get across these platforms to get to this stupid cave or whatever, and I died a whole bunch of times, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this game, if I'm going to be able to deal with this. And at times it was hard to really stick with the game because the 3D platforming is so bad. There were a few sections after that, or maybe one where it wasn't as bad because it just was the platforms were more forgiving and there wasn't much space for error. It was easy. There wasn't like a huge gap that you could fall through. But as I progressed further, it just is this mess where you basically have to figure out where you are based upon the shadow you cast on the ground, and it's not always easy to see that, and even in some cases that part of the gameplay is not really helpful, and it just led to some excruciatingly frustrating bits where I was screaming at my TV. So many expletives were coming out of my mouth. If I was a controller thrower, I would have thrown it a handful of times. I don't know how many times I died, but you'll see in this here video, and right now you'll be watching me fail numerous times, but it was so incredibly frustrating because I wanted to like the game so much, but then all the 3D platforming was against me doing that. The action, while not great, was fine. It was serviceable. The 2D platforming bits weren't always perfect, but they weren't terrible. For the most part, they were serviceable. And there were moments where I was in a groove and I was landing all these jumps, and it felt good. There were frustrating bits in there, but there are frustrating bits in a lot of platformers. But when it came to the 3D platforming, it was just an absolute nightmare, and I hated every second of it. And then later in the game, you get these things where like, okay, I gotta pause this, and sometimes the checkpointing system wasn't as forgiving as I would like, and I would just be like, okay, I have to do this, I have to do that. Why is this not working? This is being way too sensitive. And ultimately, I ended up really disliking the game because of the platforming, specifically the 3D platforming. And that sucks, because I think there is good in the game, and I think I want to recommend it on the visuals alone, but if I wasn't playing the game for this series, I don't think I would have finished it. Even though it's maybe a 6-hour game, I probably spent an hour and a half having to redo bits of platforming. But it's not a long game. It's just a really disappointing game, because I can see all the potential in it, and it just doesn't come together, and that really sucks. Especially something that I was really looking forward to, but that's gonna happen when you go back and play games you wanted to, or play games as they're coming out. Not everything's gonna live up to what you hoped and expected them to be, and El Shaddai is such that. But like, I want to end on some still good bits, because I don't want to be all negative on it. There are some cool moments in the boss fights. There is one that I think it was not water. I think the fire Neperoth or something. This big, just almost derpy looking creature that just looks like a giant, I don't know, cylinder. And that boss fight was really fun because it was what you'd expect in a boss fight, with pattern recognition, and be like, okay, this is his attack now. Okay, switching things up. So I gotta dodge. I gotta jump out of this way, and then attack it here. Wait for it to do this, and like it was a fun back and forth, and I really enjoyed that. It was visually stimulating, and it was just fun, and wasn't frustrating because it was not in some kind of a horrible 3D platforming bit. And then the one I enjoyed the most because it was so ridiculous, and at first I was so confused as to what the hell was going on, and I was really annoyed. I don't know. It was a weird bit. There's this character Amaros, who is one of the fallen angels, who seems to be the good one. He ends up helping you out at a point. You play as him for a bit, which is interesting because he doesn't have the ability to use the weapons. He's just a melee fighter, and he's got like a weird tail, neck, hair thing going on. But when you first fight him, kind of in his boss fight, you're not fighting him. You're just fighting a bunch of brutes behind him as he's dancing in the foreground, and you're fighting in the background. And at a point, he just comes up right into the camera and just starts like touching it and putting his face up there and like moving away from it, moving into it, and just it is such a weird, crazy thing. And I liked it. I liked how weird the game could get for that kind of stuff. But that doesn't make up for how bad the platforming is. The platforming is god awful, and it does switch things up with gameplay as well. Like there's a section in that Tron-esque environment that is very Tron-like, where you are on a motorcycle driving through the environment, attacking enemies, which is, it goes on a bit too long and it's not particularly fun, but it is different from the rest of the game. And I appreciate a lot of that in El Shaddai, where it does decide to be different and try something not exactly new, from a global standpoint or anything, but new in terms of the actual game, where it's like, okay, you've been hack and slashing it for so long, let's throw in this bike section. Or you've been attacking and fighting enemies all this way, let's have this weird boss fight where this guy is right up in the foreground. And I appreciated that. El Shaddai is a game I appreciate for what it's trying to do, and some of the stuff it does really well, like the art and some of the moments in the game. But ultimately, I'm just really disappointed in it as a whole experience. When it comes together as a whole, I just feel like it's not quite there, and that's a shame. But I think there could be a reason for people to go back and try it, to give it a shot, because it is short, and maybe the platforming won't be terrible for you. But I think it's just important to know that the platforming, regardless of what you may think of it, if you do try it out, is not great, and it can get really frustrating. But ultimately, the game, with its way of continuing where you just wake up and stuff, it is pretty forgiving in that sense. So if you can deal with the frustration, you can progress through the game without any problem. You just have to get through sections, and that's that. But that is El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron. You can pick it up on PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360. It seems to be much cheaper on 360, so if you have both systems, that would be the one to go with. But thank you for watching this here episode, listening to this here episode of Attack the Backlog. I'm very happy with the way people reacted to the first episode, and I hope y'all enjoyed this one and continue watching more. So that is where this episode will end. Once again, I'm your host, Marc. Y'all can find me on Twitter, Instagram, all the usual places at PXSausage. This site is pixelatedsausage.com, where you can find this podcast and other podcasts like the Pixelated Sausage Podcast. And if you like crazy, kooky, colorful art like that you found in El Shaddai, you can check out my art at pxsart.com. And if you'd like to support this show and the other podcasts we do, and the site in general and everything, the art, go over to patreon.com/pxus and support us that way. So once again, thank you for watching, and please share these videos if you think you know somebody who might be interested in them. Bye bye.